Hi, and welcome to week 9, your last weekly overview. This week, we are looking at civic engagement and how civic engagement can help us address social determinants of health. So, our main objective this week is to understand the role of civic engagement in addressing social determinants of health. And you'll have two readings. One is an article called Using Community Engagement to Move Upstream to Address Social Determinants of Health, and chapter 11 from a textbook called Necessary Conversations. And so we are bringing together at the end of this semester our understanding of social determinants of health, understanding our social issue and where our social issue falls within the social determinants of health, and starting to think about what are some interventions that could help address social determinants and address our social issue. And we talked about needing to move upstream into the area of things like education, changing laws and policies, and research and advocacy. And so today, or this week, we're going to be focusing on civic engagement. Civic engagement is one way that we can address social determinants of health. And within civic engagement, there's lots of different ways to be civically engaged. And so it's important that we do some self-reflection and figure out for ourselves kind of what lane we want to be in. We can't do it all, nor should we, nor could we. And our skills and our strengths are going to be better suited for different types of civic engagement. So, um, one kind of theory around civic engagement has the following types of civic engagement that I'll share. So one is political engagement. So that is things like voting, calling your senator, calling your representatives, sending emails, signing petitions. That type of political advocacy is really essential in changing laws and policies. The people we vote for should represent our values and represent what we want to see happen in our communities. And so if we aren't engaged politically, our voice not being heard. And oftentimes, when it comes to the social determinants of health, we need systemic political change to be able to impact these social determinants. So, for example, affordable housing, we may need to change zoning policies. We might need to have more funding allocated. We may need to change a city council ordinance, and that would take political engagement in order to do that. So that's one realm. Um, Another is what we call activism or advocacy. And there's lots of different ways of being an activist or being an advocate. Some people use their social media platform to be advocates. Some show up at protests. Some will participate in boycotts. Some will, again, another form of advocacy is calling your senators or your representatives. And then we can also do advocacy on, um, we have nonprofit organizations that are doing advocacy. We can elevate their work. We can attend conferences or formal events that are advocating for something. Then we have community service or volunteerism, which is really important as well. While we're working on changing laws and policies, people still need access to food. So you can volunteer at food pantries, volunteer at homeless shelters, volunteer with young children, with the elderly, volunteering, cleaning our neighborhoods and our communities. There's so many different ways that you can volunteer. Any type of volunteerism in your community is a type of civic engagement. We also have community engaged research where we are researching what needs to be done within a community, but instead of doing that in isolation, we're actually working with people within that community and making sure they're a part of the process. Because oftentimes, what happens in research is there's some outside group that's like, yes, this is what this community needs, but they never actually talk to the people who are living and working there. And so, community engaged research is really working with individuals from the community to make sure that that research is conducted ethically and appropriately. We also have social entrepreneurship, and that's the idea of having a business that has a social mission, that the purpose is to positively contribute to the community in some way. And so I often think of Ben and Jerry's. It's one of the popular examples of a social enterprise. So they are a business, right, that sells great ice cream, but they invest back into their community. So their profits go back into their community and their foundation, and they share their profits with their community through a number of different ways. And then lastly, there's philanthropy and fundraising. So there are a ton of organizations, nonprofits, and groups out there that are trying to address these social determinants of health. And so one way that we can or help them is through fundraising. So attending their galas, their walks, their fundraising drives, that is a way that we can also be civically engaged. So you can see there's lots of different skills here, right? So if you really love working with kids and you have time to volunteer, that might be a great way to be civically engaged. Maybe you don't have that much time, but you spend 10 minutes a week sending letters to your senators, letting them know about causes that are important to you. Maybe you have a lot of money or your family does, and you are able to give a lot of money through fundraising or philanthropy. But maybe at this time in your life, you don't have a lot of money, but you have some time that you could do once a month at a food pantry. So just finding what your skill set is, but then also what you have the capacity for. But I encourage you both while you're in school and afterwards to think about, as an educated citizen, what are the ways that you want to be civically engaged? The next article that you read from Necessary Conversations was talking about some of the barriers to civic engagement. And when we talked about political engagement as one part of civic engagement, there has been a concentrated effort to suppress political engagement, particularly of women and people of color throughout the history in the United States. And so this article or this chapter specifically focused on racial discrimination within the voting process. And so they talk about different ways that people were disenfranchised from voting up until 1965 when the Voting Rights Act passed. Um, Black people in the United States were not allowed to vote in the South for the most part. There were poll taxes and it was completely legal to discriminate. They would put poll taxes in place. They had grandfather clause. They had literacy tests. Um, and all of these were types of disenfranchisement. And we don't see that type of disenfranchisement anymore, but we still see some types of voter suppression still today. There's actually in the news recently, if you've been following, there have typically been majority Black districts throughout the South, and the Supreme Court has ruled that th- they can kind of break up those Black districts through gerrymandering, which dilutes the vote of Black people. And some say that that's an example of voter suppression. We also have some communities that are restricting um, early voting or mail-in voting, which can disenfranchise certain people, reducing the number of polling places so people have to travel farther distances to get to vote. Voter ID laws. We have a new voter ID law in Nebraska over the last couple of years. Um, Requiring people to have some type of voter ID can also be a barrier for different populations of people. So we still see some examples of voter suppression today. And this article just talked about how that has a negative impact on communities and their political engagement because their voices have not been heard in the past. So that is an overview of civic engagement and how we can use civic engagement to address social determinants of health. I look forward to having more conversations about this in class this week. Thanks.